And welcome everybody to our Stingray webinar of the month. We are talking about the filter advantage, bringing your vision to reality with Tom Bull. By way of introduction, his career started with a degree in journalism, and he's been shooting professionally for over 30 years. His work has taken him to all 7 continents and nearly 90 countries. He enjoys teaching workshops as much as his shooting assignments. He also produces images for a variety of editorial, commercial, and advertising clients. Some of his highlights of his career: he was named one of America's top visionaries by National Geographic Adventure. He's a SanDisk Extreme team member. He was named one of the best photo workshop leaders in the country by Photo District News. He is also a Kelby One instructor and a Nikon USA speaker. And so, Tom, we are so excited to have you with us. Your photography, it's a little bit different style than a lot of the presenters we have. So I'm personally excited to hear from you tonight.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Always excited to, just to chat about photography. And I love the two-way street between, questions about, why did you do this, or what did you see in that image? So tonight, I'm just going to talk, I'm going to obviously talk about filters and kind of how those play out in my work. But like Michelle pointed out, and I know probably a number of you that are out there probably traveled with me getting emails today, but we shoot, and when I say we, my wife and I, we do a lot of different kind of work. And my career started in adventure sports. And it really evolved into editorial, into commercial, into lighting, and all these different things. So you really can't, I kind of say, Tom just does this or that. I like it all. And so really my end goal tonight was, I just wanted to share some recent work with everybody out there. And I'll talk about some of the technical stuff, some of the creative ideas behind it. I really believe strongly in education. And when I do these kinds of talks, I always tend to gravitate more towards doing talks where I can help folks with their photography versus, here I was doing this and that. So anyway, so what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, I teach a ton of workshops, love teaching. It's so great to be back out traveling now with COVID getting a little more, controllable. And it's just been so much fun. We've been very busy this year. We've been a bunch of different places, to Europe twice already. And one question that we constantly hear is more about the creative, how do I have better vision, improve my creativity, all these things. Certainly there's technical with the new mirrorless cameras and that, but I really want to try to help folks maybe put a finger on what they can do to improve their creativity. And I'll tell you some of the things I do that come out in these pictures that when I'm trying to motivate or see a different scene, what can I do different? There's so much work out there on social media and Facebook, and everyone's out there with the camera, a phone, whatever the case may be. So in order to really distinguish yourself from the masses, you have to take it to another level. So that'll come out in different ways tonight. So hopefully you guys will all get some ideas, maybe be inspired. I'll talk about some other, a golden blue polarizer. I thought that would be fun to chat about tonight. We had some questions about that recently, and I'm like, you know what? That is the coolest filter. Let me show you what I do with that. And I am going to tell one story tonight. If you've traveled with me, I tell stories. It's a bear story, and it's an Alaska bear story, but I'll save that until we get there. So probably should just jump right into this, and I'll start going through some images. So when I'm looking at a landscape or whatever the image may be, especially landscape work in particular, though, I think there's a real tendency just to focus and shoot. You see the scene, you're like, okay, I'm going to get this. Let me do this. Just click, click, click. But I know what I've learned through the years is I need to slow down, and I really need to say, what am I trying to do here? There's that initial, you're just so excited and I'm going to get it. And then you kind of take that initial shot. But I always find for my own work that as I get deeper into the shoot, that often is when I produce the best images. So one thing that I would tell you guys is landscape work hinges so much on mood and emotion. I think a lot of us think of it more as in a graphic realm, but there are underlying tones of emotion coming out through color, through design, contrast. And so if you're asking me, well, how do I shoot a better landscape photo? I'm going to try to give you ideas on that. And one of those is just really thinking about the mood you're trying to convey. Like with water and slowing it down, I'm using a 4-stop ND filter here. And if you don't know what an ND filter, it's a neutral density filter. It just is a dark filter that reduces the amount of light coming into the camera, which allows you to shoot at a slower shutter speed. With water, especially a river or an ocean like this, that gives you this amazing creative control to say to yourself, what do I want the water to look like? And how is that going to affect the mood and the overall shot? On an image like this, this was 16 seconds. So there's not a lot of texture here. There's a little bit, but this was a very rough ocean, and it's been smoothed out by that longer shutter speed. What would this look like if I shot it at, say, 1/4 of a second? To me, it would have been a completely different photograph and really said a different thing. It would have been much more about kind of an angry ocean environment. This, to me, is more tranquil, moody, serene, mysterious. That's really a lot of that is coming from the choice of a slow shutter speed. Now, whether that's 4 seconds or 16 or 20, that's going to really change the texture of the water, and it directly relates to how much motion is in the water. So there's not a set number you can say, do this and get this effect. There's other variables there, but I would encourage you guys to think about really what is the mood in the landscape and how can I best convey that? And for me on this shot, it was slowing the water way down to kind of get this mysterious feel on this coastline down in Tasmania. One thing I would point out that's so fun with the new mirrorless cameras, you now have this amazing ability to shoot. It used to be 30 seconds was the time limit on a DSLR. And after that, you needed to be in bulb mode, use a shutter cable release or some other way. Now the newer cameras are allowing shutter speeds of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And so for whatever reason, I can never seem to remember my cable release, but now when I'm shooting these 30-second or 2 or 5 minute exposures, I can actually dial that into a Z9 and hit that. And I don't have to worry about having bulb and locking down the cable release. So let's jump from a landscape into travel photography. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just real quick, how do you select your shutter speed for slowing down water shots?
Yeah, so the simple answer there is I have to experiment. I'll have an initial sense of, okay, this is a really rough ocean. I'm going to try 10 seconds, and then I'll take a look at it. And what I'm evaluating is this the right texture and the right smoothness and just feel to the water? And if I think it needs to be more silky, then I'm going to go slower. And if it needs a little more texture and direction, I'll shoot a little faster. But you have to experiment a little bit and try to match the water with the overall concept that you're trying to go for in your shot. Along those same lines, I'll jump between landscape, travel, adventure sports. I'll give you guys a bunch to pick from tonight based on what you're going to do. But here's a similar example with this image. When we're traveling, and we just got back from Spain like 4 days ago, we were there 2 weeks, had a terrific time, amazing photography over there. And there's just this tendency where you're out there on the day tour, you're walking around and you're just kind of like shooting and clicking and shooting and clicking. And I think it's easy to say, okay, wait a second, I really need to slow down a second. What can I do that's different than all these people here with the cell phone? Or how can I really create a photograph out of this? This is a water temple in Bali. Bali's a magical place for sure, if you ever get a chance to go over there. And it's surrounded by ocean, obviously. And they have these water temples where they have a very active ocean. Once again, lots of wave action. When you take a snapshot of this image at 1/250th, it's just, yep, you've recorded the shot, but have you really made a photograph? And I ask that myself constantly. If you want to become a better photographer, you just have to have pretty high standards. Like, this isn't good enough. What else can I do? What's a different angle on it? I do that constantly. I'm always driving myself to say there's something else here. And for this image, I went back to that slow shutter speed to add some mystery and motion in the water. It's so important for this photo. The added benefit is you have people moving around in the back of the shot. So it really conveys, it's obviously a busy place. It's kind of a spiritual place to the Balinese there. And I liked how that water kind of coincided with that idea and the people moving around on the rocks. So just think about that. And once again, what is the mood that you're trying to convey? What's the concept of the image? Snapshots versus photographs. This was a topic that was really hot last couple of weeks. You can record the moment, nothing wrong with that. I'm going to come home, I'm going to show my friends, hey, here I was in this place, and these were these really nice people I met, and that's fine. So much of photography is just sharing with others your experiences, and if that's what your end goal is, that's terrific. If you're trying to go a little beyond that and really tap into the craft of photography, to me, it's sharing the moment, but it's doing it in a creative, cohesive way. And so when I take a look at this image, this is, if you've been to Croatia, they have Dubrovnik, they have this high walled area that you can walk around the city, and it gives you this amazing look down into town, this great angle and perspective. And so I'm sitting up there, it's middle of the day, and you have all these people. And once again, I took a lot of photos at, as slow as I could get my camera, maybe in bright midday light. Maybe you can get down to like a quarter of a second at your lowest ISO and your smallest aperture opening. But the people just were still basically static there. I wanted more movement and motion in, because I knew that the people, it would be like the water in that water temple. They're going to create this moving pattern down the street, and it's going to engage the viewer. And you'll hear me say that a lot. I had an editor tell me one time when they looked through my work, they're like, listen, when they open the magazine page, they need to be drawn right in. You have to stop them. You're competing with all these other magazines and all this other content. Your photographs have to engage the viewer. And if they don't, then you can do something better. And I've never forgotten that. And I think about that a lot when I'm taking an image. It's like, I want people to stop a second and wonder. And so that's what I got with this. I had to use a 4-stop ND in the middle of the day to get a slow enough shutter speed, but that allowed me to create this interesting look to the people combined with this high perspective. Okay, well, let's see, keep going here. So let's talk a little bit more about another idea that I hear a lot on workshops, and it's a great topic, and that's in camera versus in the computer. And we all work on whatever editing platform to process our raw files. That's how digital photography works. And there's certainly ways that you can alter exposure and do a lot of different things. So that's more on the back end. I definitely am always looking to do it on the front hand in the camera. And it's for two reasons. One is just the technical. I have highlights, and if I expose for my highlights, I may not get a lot of detail in my shadows. So how can I accomplish that in the field? One simple way in looking at this image is I can use a graduated neutral density filter that is shaded on the top half, clear on the bottom. It just allows me to move that shaded part down over the highlights. And so you're kind of compressing the dynamic range, but that allows you to open up the shadows. You're not so concerned about exposing for the highlights now, because the highlights aren't so bright. You made it a little narrower, so you get better shadow detail in the camera right then and there. The other side to this equation, and I really, really believe this, is I know for myself, I shoot differently based on what I see on the back of my camera when I'm shooting. And here's a great exercise that we'll talk to folks a lot about doing in the field. Go out for a day and shoot in black and white. And what that means is you're not coming back with color images and converting to black and white in the computer. You are turning to that monochrome setting in your camera and shooting everything in black and white. I guarantee if you try that, you will look at the back of, you review your images, whether it's in the viewfinder or on the LCD, and you are going to photograph differently than if you just were shooting in color and then you came back and converted to black and white. Well, why is that? Well, you're stripping color out of the image and you're seeing different graphic qualities that aren't as apparent when color is the overriding theme. You're looking at shadow, texture, line, things like this that just are so obvious in a black and white shot. It's the same with using filters in a color image. If I see an image with a filter and it looks one way or the other in the field, I'm going to adjust versus coming back and saying, yeah, I'll tweak it later. Maybe you end up with the same result, but on a personal level for me, I'm always going to be trying to do it in camera if I can do that. There's one other statement here that I just have to point out on this shot. Another really important part of these big landscape images is the middle ground. We get so focused on the foreground and the background, obviously really, really important. And there, oh yeah, there's that middle ground. Well, on a scene like this in Death Valley, where you have the salt polygons in Badwater Basin, if you go 6 inches higher or lower, that really changes the perspective and how much you can see of the middle ground. So don't forget to, what I say, let the middle ground breathe. And all that that's saying is find that right camera level so that maybe it's a little higher so that you show more of that middle ground to the viewer. In this case, that's really important because it's really about these polygons that just stretch off into infinity. So think a lot about that. That would be a tip I would throw out to you guys. And I think a lot of us subconsciously do that. You're just looking and kind of responding to the graphic components of the shot. But I always try to take it a step further and say, you know, what am I really doing here? And then it's, if I can articulate it to myself, then I'm more aware of it the next time I take an image in the field.
So on that shot, you used the graduated ND, and the last couple of shots, it were solid ND. Do you want to speak to why you would use a graduated versus solid filter?
Yeah, sure, exactly. So as Michelle pointed out, on these earlier images, it was about giving the entire scene less light. So a standard ND filter is uniformly dark at maybe it's a 2-stop or 4-stop or 10-stop dark. So it's just reducing that amount of light that's coming into the camera, but it's uniform across the entire filter. A graduated filter, let's just say the top half of it has a certain shaded stop value. It could be 2 stops, 3, 4 stops. And then the lower part of this filter, it's a rectangular filter, is clear. So in this image above here, the shaded graduated part of it, in this case, it's 2 stops, that is perfectly lined up along the mountains in the sun. And then that clear part of that filter is what is on the shadowed part, so that you don't want to reduce the light in the shadows. You're only trying to reduce the light in the highlights. And I don't go anywhere without my grad NDs. I just, if you want to, I'll tell you right now, if anybody is going to ask this question, what filters do I always leave the house with? Always have a polarizer. Always have a graduated filter. Generally, it's a 2-stop or maybe a 3. And I always bring a 5-stop ND. So that solid 5-stop, a graduated 2-stop, and then a polarizer just is key. And I'll talk more about that coming up. Okay, so along those same lines, so you have all these different scenes, and then you go to places like the desert where you can't get any more extreme in terms of highlights and shadows. So that dynamic range, that tonal value between the shadows until the highlights, it can be very extreme in, say, the desert Southwest. Maybe it's less extreme in other areas where the light just doesn't seem so intense. Now, you know, maybe that's generalizing a little bit, but I know for myself, I seem to see the biggest dynamic range challenges in the desert. And so you have a clear day. This is in Sedona, and the Cathedral Rocks, these beautiful formations downtown or outside of town there. When first light comes out, they just are glowing. But the shadows that you see in the foreground there, and especially that plant, those are in pretty heavy shades. So this becomes another challenge of how can I compress that tonality a little bit so that I can't blow my highlights out, but I have to have enough detail in the shadows. Otherwise, my photo isn't going to work. So in this case, I use that same graduated ND filter, a 3-stop version, so a little stronger on the shaded part of the filter, and I just slid it down over the highlights of the peaks. Now, one other aspect of these filters, which we haven't talked about yet, is you can have a hard transition or a soft transition. With mountainscapes, having a soft transition is a better choice because your horizon isn't perfectly level. If you photograph on the water in the ocean, or say a lake or something like that, then you have a very distinct line, and a hard edge transition works fine. But in the mountains, generally the softer transition so that you can't see where the filter begins and ends, and then you're trying to line it up with a very jagged horizon line like this. Another thing that I would, just stepping away from the filter and more on the graphic quality of this, another thing that we see a lot with landscape photographers is this struggle of understanding perspective, balance, and harmony in the image. And so you have an image like this, if you look at this shot, and obviously you have these towers that just are going to dominate the shot. For one, they're going to be lit. Two, there's the strongest contrast up there on the horizon line. So for anything to really have visual weight and really mix in a photograph here, you're going to have to think a lot about how big it is, what the subject matter is, and what perspective, what focal length of lens are you going to use to really balance out with those big spires up there. So in this case, I'm using a 14 to 30 millimeter lens. So, and it's probably about 14 millimeters. If I had to guess, it's going to be very close to that, because I need this bush, this plant, it's kind of a flowering desert plant. I need it to be pretty big and strong in the shot because it's in the shade. And to really get any kind of harmony or balance in this image, with those sunlit spires, I got to be close to it with a big wide angle lens. If I shoot this with a 24 or a 35, then I got to back away a little further to get the full plant in, but that's making the plant smaller now. So it's, there's always this give and take. So always think about that when especially a vertical composition where there's a lot of seesawing going on between the foreground and the background. What are the elements and how do they work together? One other thing I just would throw out, if you're reading this slide, you're saying, what is a Z Pro filter holder? If you go to the Stingray site, you can see in the accessories, it's a filter holder that screws onto the front of your lens. It allows you to put these graduated filters in there. You can easily and really accurately adjust where they are. You can also use a polarizer while using a graduated ND filter, which I do fairly frequently, especially in landscape work. So that's what that's all about. Sometimes I hand hold the graduated NDs. If I'm moving really quick, I may just take it out of the pouch and just hold it against the front of the lens and use it that way. But it's generally not quite as accurate. Okay, so the $1 million question: you go to these national parks and they're inspiring places and they're well photographed. So, why do I even go there? Everyone shot it. It's been done. I always take a step back from that and say, well, wait a second. We go here because we're inspired by the photographs we've seen of the place. So just going to a location, doesn't matter how photographed it's been or not, that's a good thing. I mean, I know for me, I could go sit at Yavapai Point in the Grand Canyon 100 times a year, and every time I see it, I'm still inspired and very excited about it. So I would tell folks, when you're in these national parks, and hopefully everybody's getting a chance to go out and travel this year, if you're trying to find that original photograph, it's there. I promise, every time you go to a national park, there's a new way to shoot it that is going to be different. It's going to hinge on where you are, what the weather's doing. Obviously, there's a lot of variables there, but never be daunted by this idea of, well, it's, your work's better if it's somewhere no one's been before. No, that has an original element to it in the bigger creativity picture, but that doesn't necessarily equate to a better photograph. I really enjoy going to the parks and challenging myself and saying, I got to find something that no one else has done. I love being here. I just like walking around out here. It's such a cool place. But all right, let's think about a photograph. And so here's a scene I just would explain really quickly. This happens a lot, and maybe it'll help you get that image that is going to inspire others or be a standout shot. A lot of times it's the waiting game with weather, what's going on just the sliver above the horizon. I just can't tell you the number of times where the shoot has looked like a bust, And yet there's just this tiny band that, maybe it's going to open up there, or maybe it's not. And it does. And the most frustrating thing in the universe is when you are not ready for it. You're like running down the trail going, gosh, I should have gotten here 10 minutes earlier. I didn't think it was going to break, and it's breaking. This luckily was a case where we were with a group here and we were looking at this. It did not look like the sun was going to come out at all. And yet it did. And it was like a 2-minute window of this beamy, shafty light, and boom, it was done. And so just remember, you may have a lot of times where you get shut down, but for the few that come out, maybe you're getting a shot that looks a little more different than what we've seen in this case at Bryce or somewhere else. In terms of the technical on this, once again, this is direct sunlight. So I know I'm going to have an extreme bright highlight blinking there, and it's going to illuminate the scene fairly nicely. But what I'm doing in this shot is I used a 2-stop soft edge graduated ND. I'm just bringing it down over the clouds. I'm trying to tame the sun just a little bit. I'm trying to bring that sunlight down so that it's just not this huge overexposed area in the frame. You could say, well, let's do HDR. That's great, except the clouds are flying past right now. So when you have movement in HDR, it gets a little trickier to put them together. And once again, I feel like more often than not, I can create it with a single frame. Maybe I'm just using a filter to help minimize some of those highlights. So just a thought on that one.
We have 2 related questions, a twofer. How do you determine what graduated ND filter do you use? Do you experiment with different stops on the same shot?
Yeah, that's a great question. Experience would tell me I can almost always do what I want to do with either a 2-stop or a 3-stop. And I will just look at the scene. And if it's going to be, with this one, I might have been able to probably go with a 3-stop because it's basically direct sunlight, but I went with 2. So I am helping tame it a little bit, not as much as I could with a 3, but I always toggle back and forth between 2 and 3 stops on my graduated NDs. Rarely do I go beyond that. Okay, here we go. Keep going. Reflections. Let's talk really quickly about those. Such a great photographic concept, subject matter, topic. Once again, you can run into the same issue where you have bright highlights being reflected and you're not gonna be able to capture as much as you want in the shot. And maybe you can't do an HDR. These little puffy blue clouds are ripping through here. So that's gonna look strange. And the windmills could be potentially spinning. So I'm just using my tried and true formula here where I will get out my 2-stop graduate ND very quickly, put it over the highlights of the sky. Now I have to tell you guys, don't do this. And I've done it. You remember, reflections are always darker than what they reflect. So if you put a really strong graduated ND filter on the sky part, then all of a sudden the reflection becomes brighter than the sky. That's not what you want to do. Ideally, you're going to keep your sky just slightly brighter than what it's reflecting. What that allows you to do, though, is when you get more compressed on the tonalities, you can get richer colors. You're not inhibited by this highlight blinky that we so often are watching as in digital cameras, where we can't clip the highlights. We all know that rule, expose or don't clip the highlights, or if you do clip the highlights, make sure they're not important in the image. Well, by using a grad ND filter here, I'm just going to tone down the highlights and I'm going to not have to worry about that. It's just going to give me a better look. And I have to tell you, it's like eye candy looking at an image on the back of your camera when you are shooting it like this in the field. I mean, it looks like what you're looking at right here. You're like, oh my gosh, this is so incredible. And that in turn, at least for me, that gets me more excited and more motivated. If I'm not using a filter here and I'm saying, yeah, I'm going to do it later in the computer, whatever, I'm not trying to say that's a bad thing or not. But for me, I know I get better work if I'm doing it in the camera in the field. So, okay, here we go. What else is there? Oh, you guys have to try this. If you have not done this, you must go do this. So my latest fascination is You see a lot of storm photography this time of year. There's thunderstorms and tornadoes. I mean, there's storm chasers. There's all that stuff going on. Well, one thing that you can do where you don't have to, go to that extreme level is just wait for the anticipation of a system, a front. Maybe it is a thunderstorm, but when you get these fast moving clouds in the middle of the day, try to imagine what they would look like at 2 minutes or 4 minutes. And it's hard to initially learn to visualize what that might look like. This was a shot last year. We're in May up in Yellowstone. All the animals are coming out. It's great. There's just everything is fresh. It's spring. And you still have ice on some of the lakes. And we just had this incredible storm that was blowing through Yellowstone along Lake Yellowstone here. And it was like, wow, take the photo at 1/250th and you have these static clouds. They're kind of stormy stratus clouds, not that interesting. You can see the wind and you can definitely tell they're moving quickly. So you start going back into your head and saying to yourself, how do I create a photograph of this? I don't want to just be happy with a snapshot here. I mean, that'll show what it is, but I'm going to transform that entire sky into something different. So in this case, I used a solid 5-stop ND filter, put it on there. The lake wasn't moving whatsoever. It was just the clouds up above. And it's like unwrapping a Christmas present when the camera pops this image up on the LCD. You never quite know what it's going to look like after one of these long shots. And then you do it and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So I would highly encourage you guys, if you haven't experimented with this idea of stretching out clouds and creating mood and different things in skies like this, get an ND filter, give it a shot and see what you can do. You'll be shocked. It is really, really fun. Once again, too, the mirrorless cameras, they have all these extended shutter speeds now. So, hey, you don't even need a cable release. So let me flip over to adventure sports. How many genres can we go through here? My career started in adventure sports. I know a number of you know that. That's all I did. I was guiding all around the world on mountains and kayaking and 30 days at a time in the field. And I love that. I mean, that's still a part of me. I don't do it quite as much. However, we live in a town right on a beautiful river here in Colorado. And so just the other day, this is like from a couple of days ago, I went down there and they have a play park for the kayakers and they're all down there surfing away. And I already knew going into this what I wanted to do. I've shot thousands of kayakers, static, going off waterfalls, that kind of thing. And those are amazing pictures, don't get me wrong. But today my mission for this kayaker was, I want to be a little more abstract, a little more fine art-like, and render it in a different way. And so the only way I'm going to be able to shoot at a slow enough shutter speed to get this movement of the waves and the paddler is using an ND filter. It's bright. It's an overcast day, but I think the slowest shutter speed I could get down to was like a quarter. I can't even remember where it was. It was faster than that because I think my final shot was about an eighth or a quarter. So it must have been like a 30th of a second. You put on an ND filter, it just blocks light and it allows you to shoot at a slow shutter speed and do something creative. So I can already hear folks are saying, you know what? I just don't do kayaking. That's not my thing. Here's one for you. We were in Sicily earlier this year, and we were doing pan and blur of bikers going through the streets in Sicily. Well, if you're trying to pan and track a biker as they zoom past, and you really want to get that beautiful blurred out background, you need to be down at an eighth, a quarter of a second, 1/20th. It depends on how fast your biker's going and what your focal length is. But you can put on a 2-stop ND or something a little less powerful than, say, a 4 or 5, and it works great in travel photography. So it's not something that's always associated with, say, adventure sports. There's a lot of different ways to incorporate this into your shooting. Somebody asked me about diffraction too. Another reason that I like ND filters are or somebody may be looking at the EXIF data here saying, well, why don't you just shoot at f/22? I mean, that's going to get you a lot slower shutter speed. It's going to make that aperture opening really small and eliminate light. All true. However, when you're at those extremes of apertures, the f/22s or, in that range, the lens quality, it doesn't matter what camera system or what you're using, lenses just don't perform as well there because it's such a tiny hole, and the way the beams of light, the wavelengths come through there and render, you're going to lose some quality. So if you can shoot at f8 or somewhere more in the middle, you're going to, chances are the lens performs a lot better there than it will at 22. So that's why I'm not going to just choose f22 to slow the shot down. Okay, so I'll tell you, I have a 3-frame sequence here of this Alaska trip, and let me just spell this one out to you guys. So I used to live in Alaska. I've been up there the last, I think I'm on the 35th summer in a row, and I've been photographing grizz for probably at least 30 years. Probably more than that. First, I was a guide where all you did is try to avoid the bears, and then you turn into a photographer and you're like trying to sneak up on them. It's kind of like, woo. But bear photography is so much fun, and you can do it safely in the right situations. And this was one of them. This was in Katmai National Park, not on the coastline or at Brooks Camp, but there's remote rivers all over that massive park out there that we would float plane into from a lodge. We go different places. And an image that I've wanted to do forever is, I've shot a lot of bears, and I'm sure probably a number of folks in the audience have photographed bears. You get them chasing salmon, they're running at you. I mean, they're very exciting, compelling photographs, absolutely. But for me, I had a lot of that, and I'm like, I just want to do something different. And I kept thinking about these amazing sockeye runs in Alaska, and sockeye being red salmon. And I'm like, God, wouldn't it be great to show kind of a bigger view, less about the drama or the fish in the mouth or anything like that. I want to show more of an environmental shot. But to really make that happen, first, I got to time the sockeye run perfectly. Then I got to find a place where hopefully there's going to be bears. And honestly, if there's a lot of fish in the river, chances are you'll have the bears. But then here's a couple other ones that are a little harder to do. I need a high perspective, because this isn't eye level. This is up above. You're not flying drones, right? No drones in the national parks. They bother the wildlife, not allowed. And the biggest kicker here was I wanted a sunny day. Now, if you've lived in Alaska, you'll know this, or maybe you visited it. There's a reason there's a lot of glaciers in Alaska. It's cloudy. It snows and rains a lot. I'm sure you get sunny days up there, but not. When we lived there, we could have summers where we'd have like 4 sunny days all summer long. Other years more so, but it can be a hard one to muster. Well, we had the perfect storm on this river where we had beautiful sunny weather. We had this incredible sockeye run in this emerald green river and these enormous brown bears, grizzly bears. And so everything was perfect. But this was the kicker. The image that I had in my mind was I wanted a grizz encircled by red fish. And I've shot a similar scene through the years in smaller creeks or over overcast skies. You may be asking, why is a sunny day so important? Because I needed light to penetrate into the water. If you've ever shot underwater photography, you like high sun. You need light to penetrate into the shallows to give you better color, better exposure. In this case, I just need to see the fish better. I wanted more color in the water. And then the key to get this image, which was the one I wanted so bad, was I had to have a polarizer. I shot some of these exact same photos without a polarizer. And then I shot some with the polarizer, and pretty much I was shooting the polarizer the whole time. You just can't get the effect I can't in the computer doing whatever you do that you do when you use a polarizer and visibly reveal the glare and eliminate the glare on the water. And all of a sudden you're seeing in infinite detail bright red sockeye salmon running around this bear. I mean, I was like laughing like a 4-year-old child. I was just giddy because everything was coming together. And then here's what got me so excited. And this is what's so much fun about photography. You have the best laid plans, and then something else happens, and it constantly works this way on assignments where you like, hey, who saw that coming? This bear just decided it was never going to bring its head out of the water, and instead it just snorkeled around chasing these fish. Now, I've seen bears snorkel before, but a lot of times they like to run in the water, splash, move the fish up onto the bank, and they're easier to catch. But this bear just sat out in this river, and half the time he didn't even try to get the fish. He just would sit there with his head underwater and watch these salmon go around in circles. And put on the polarizer, twist it, all of a sudden the glare is gone, the fish are bright red, you have bright sun. And, this was this photograph that it's one of my favorite bear photos ever. And it was a lot of luck, and it was a lot of time just roaming around in Alaska, hoping for everything to kind of come together. So just thought I'd share that with you guys tonight. Now,
this is actually a really great example of a photo with a circular polarizer, because like you said, you can sharpen the edges in Photoshop, but you can't reveal what's not in the original photo. And with the polarizer, you can get rid of that glare. You can see through the water, and you honestly can't do that in Photoshop or Lightroom.
Oh, I can tell you right now, Michelle, it was so great because, as you pointed out, you reveal what's underneath. And the only way you can do that is in the field using a polarizer. And without a polarizer, I promise this photograph wouldn't have been nearly as dramatic. I mean, it was like somebody was peeling back the banana peel and you're seeing, what you're going to eat. It's like, oh my gosh, now I can see the fish. I can see the bottom. The glare completely goes away. It was very, very exciting on that. Tied to this bear shot, and this is another tip I would throw out, and this is more on a creative level, but I just want to try to share some ideas that hopefully you guys can take away from, and maybe it'll help your own photography. We often look at images, or at least I do, from a kind of a singular standpoint where, still photography is based on that premises that the still image has the power to change the world. And it really does. I mean, we won't go off on that tangent. However, when your guys are photographing, and maybe it's a landscape or whatever it may be, wildlife, it doesn't matter. Take the image that you're so excited about, but also always have in the back of your head, how does this play out in a bigger picture story? Imagine if you had an assignment to fill a magazine with like a 5-page feature article about the Alaska salmon run. And you would you're looking at this going, oh, great, this is right before dinner, and I really didn't want to see a bunch of dead fish. But I'm just saying, you may photograph things that you, one, would have not photographed at all, or two, you may do it differently because you're thinking of a layout. Hey, let me try vertical versus horizontal. And if you're asking me, well, how do I improve my creativity? I'm going to respond to you, well, think editorially. And people are like, well, what's that mean? And what it means is, whether you're going to create a picture story or not, imagine that you are when you're taking your images, and you may shoot things differently or stuff you wouldn't shoot at all. And I promise it'll get you thinking outside the box and how you normally shoot. And you may be surprised at what you come back with. You're like, yeah, I was thinking I was going to do a blur book on this. I'm not going to do that book, but I actually really love this shot. And so there's just a little tip I would throw to you guys. It'll shift your creative endeavors if you're thinking in a different concept. Okay, a few other ones here just to show with you guys tonight. Back to these polarizers. As Michelle pointed out, we shoot a lot of fall color out here, and I'm sure a number of people in the audience do as well. And a polarizer at sunrise, sunset with that low angle, so you're at that perfect kind of 90-degree angle in this case, because the sun's low and I'm shooting perpendicular to it. I know a polarizer is just we'd had a lot of rain here, so it does a great job of reducing glare in foliage. It's going to punch the colors up. It adds contrast. So that's kind of the technical level. Here's another tip I will throw out to you, all you photographers, especially you landscape folks tonight. I think probably some of the best work that happens for any particular scene is in the first 30 seconds to a minute when the sun hits it. So think about that a second. You're like, yeah, okay, I get it. We all wait for sunrise. But what I'm trying to say is this. Look at this shot right here. This is literally like 20 seconds after the sun barely was clipping a ridge and illuminating the scene. 2 minutes later, all that forest that you see in front of you is fully illuminated. It still looks great. I mean, it's just a beautiful shot. Mount Sneffels, you got all these aspen, but because you get it in the first illuminating moments look at the shadow and the shafty qualities of the light. It has so much dimension and richness in it because it's not fully illuminated. There's a saying, we do a lot of lighting stuff in our commercial work, and there's a saying when you're learning how to use lights, is it illuminated or is it lit? And what illuminated means is, yeah, anybody can make a softbox and just point it at something and blast light at it. You know, it'll probably look pretty good. But if you want to light the shot, it's more about just not blowing a bunch of light over the entire scene. It's about putting it in different pieces in the scene and really controlling how the viewer takes in that shot. You're going to direct the viewer by what's illuminated and what's not. Well, the sun will do the same thing for you when it first comes up. Catch it while it's really low and just barely breaking the horizon, you're going to get different qualities and beams of light than you're going to get 5 minutes after full sunrise. So really make sure that I'm the worst. I'll be out there with the group and I'll just be like, let me tell you this Alaska story. And all of a sudden the sun's coming up. That's the time that, Tom, you need to close your mouth, because no, this is the most important moment. So that's a really, don't ever forget that. When that sun first shows up, that's money time right there. You really got to stay in tune with it. More of the same. This is another polarizer. Now I'll use two different ones. I'll use the neutral polarizer when I don't really want to influence the color balance at all. I just basically want to reduce glare and do what we probably all think a traditional polarizer does. With this one, this is a color combo that adds a little more warm tones to the scene. It's also, a lot of these polarizers don't reduce the amount of light at all, which sometimes can be a challenge with polarizers, but they work terrific. And I love the color combos for scenes like this that are foliage or things that I want to saturate the color a little bit. When you add a polarizer, you're going to reduce glare, you're going to create some stronger contrast, which generally helps you in what you're trying to do with your image. And this one, it adds a little more tension to the shot. And I think it makes it more effective by just adding that polarizer. Okay, a few more to go here. Who's used a gold and blue polarizer? A lot of us haven't. It is just fun. Now, with a gold and blue, think outside the box here. If you're a black and white shooter, you're not seeing the color. So gold and blue is kind of handy because it can actually add contrast to color ranges that a traditional polarizer wouldn't do. And that's going to help you perhaps with your grayscale and what you're trying to do with the black and white image. I just like these purely for the color, and I'm not worried about rendering reality more often than not when I use this. This scene that you're seeing here is in this canyon in a river near our house here. The canyon walls get lit in the winter, but the water never really gets sun in a lot of places. It's so narrow in there. But what's amazing is the water will reflect the sun up on the canyon walls. Well, this was last winter, I think. I can't remember when we shot this, maybe last winter or 2 winters ago. And we had so much fun with the gold and blue because you already have a warm tone to the water. And the way this polarizer works is depending on how you rotate it, you can either enhance the gold or the yellows or the blues. And in this case, you can see the whites are still fairly neutral, but there's this almost super saturated yellow going on. And that's that gold aspect of the polarizer. The other way to look at this is this one. Now you're saying, whoa, this is way outside the realm. Yeah, this is just having fun. And don't ever forget, you guys got to experiment. Doesn't matter if you like it or not. What's important is you're trying something different. There's another thing that I tell folks in creativity classes. The process is as important as the end result. So whether you get the award-winning photo or not, the fact that you're experimenting is broadening your horizons and helping your creativity. So a gold and blue, when you're seeing a scene like this, if you turn around and say, man, that doesn't look real. That's true. This is not about, trying to make something reality. This is experimenting with color, shape, design, and just letting it go. That's so liberating for how you photograph. I can't say that enough. We all have to get outside what we do well and try different things to go to different directions in our creativity.
I love that you touched on this polarizer too, because we've gotten a couple of questions about it in the past. And it's nice to see somebody with some experience to it. And I love how that last shot, it almost looks like a sunset turned that water yellow. Like it doesn't look surreal at all. It just looks like there's a golden sunset shining on it.
Yeah, yeah. I think the one thing that I've learned with the golden blue is you can minimize or maximize the effect that you get. And so you can create something that no one's going to know that you even use the golden blue polarizer with. It is a really fun filter. If you're looking for something to try that maybe is a little different, you should check one of these out. We always have them. We play with them a lot. They're really fun.
So on this shot, how did you emphasize both the gold and blue simultaneously?
Yeah, what was really helping with this is it was obviously leaning towards the blue side on the filter, but we just had this amazing warm light reflecting off this canyon wall. So there's maybe a little help from the filter in the water, but it was also just this incredible scene that just had literally the last rays of light illuminating this warm granite-like rock, and so that's what the water's picking up. And then, of course, the blue and the snow is more of the effect of the filter. Okay, last couple that I have for you guys. I thought I would answer another question that we hear a whole bunch, and that is, do you use a protective filter? And the short answer is we use these all the time. Look at this image right here. This is during a sandstorm at White Sands. A great time actually to be out and photograph. You look at it when you're driving in, you're saying, this is really a bad idea. Yeah, maybe you're not going to do a lens switch out there. But if you get out there and you have blowing sand, and it's going to create these atmospherics that are not probably what most people are going to want to photograph in. Here's another one of my favorite sayings. When you see all the other photographers going that way, you go the other way. And so if it's really windy in Patagonia, or there's a sandstorm and, oh my gosh, who's going to go out there? Well, I am. That's going to be something probably new. And now you have to take it with a little bit of grain of salt if it's going to be really hard on your camera gear, depending on how bad it is. But I'm not worried about my front element collecting sand like a sandbox in the backyard, because all the Hilux filters that Stingray produces, you put them on the front of your lens. They're going to protect that front element. In this case, in White Sands, it was ripping. It was really howling. Love some of the images I got. There is no way I would wanted to be out there without something covering the front of the lens, because of the amount of blowing sand that was just blasting past. As it was probably borderline just for the lens itself, because of all the other gaskets and everything else on there. But anyway, we do like those. I use them all the time. This is a shot from last winter. If you ever worked with sled dogs and you get close to them, you may have like a dog standing on you, like a 100-pound sled dog, like, oh, hello. And your camera, meanwhile, is buried in the snow beside you. So yeah, I use these protective filters a lot for a lot of situations, blowing snow or any situation. I just leave them on my lenses in case there's a reason I would ever want to take one off, which generally isn't the case. I just know that I'm not worried about cracking a front lens. I can tell you, the number of times on workshops, we've seen people drop a lens in a parking lot and that front filter cracks, but it protects the lens. It just gives a little more rigidity, and it's going to protect the front element as well as just the shape and the diameter and the threads on the front lens. So anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed that. I think that's all I have for you guys tonight. Here's us, me. Come shoot bears with us this summer. We still have space on a bear photo. Who wants to go chase salmon? Anyway, please, Michelle is certainly fielding questions. You can see my contact info there. I'm always game to talk cameras or technique with folks if you have questions. And I just would thank Stingray and Michelle for putting this all together tonight. I hope you guys have gotten some new ideas on ways to take photographs.
Thank you. I love your approach to things too. You seem to really have fun in the field.
Oh yeah. Got to keep it fun.
I've been holding on to some questions. So a couple of related ones here. Let me see if I can put them together. You spoke about being in Spain for 2 weeks. I'm assuming you were not just taking photos during the classic golden hours of sunrise and sunset. So during the middle part of the day when the sun is most harsh, what do you use to compensate for the harsh light? And would a Stingray variable ND filter be a good solution for that problem?
The filter answer is yes. And that's actually just a phenomenal question. You can shoot all day long, and filters are going to help you deal with contrast issues, whether you want to just slow down a scene and you don't want that bright light in the middle of the day. Another piece of advice I would tell folks is you look for areas that the light is working even in the middle of the day. If you're in a cityscape, you can find alleys that are fully shaded. And so you can still do nice images there without any kind of harsh light. Sometimes it's interiors. Sometimes you get interesting shadows created by overhead light. So another thing as a travel photographer, and when you shoot editorial or we work for tourism bureaus, you're totally right. You don't just shoot at dawn and dusk. You're out all day long. And so you're really learning how to optimize light for what you're given. And I always tell myself, there's a great photograph here. It's not the light's problem. It's mine. If I can't see something, then I better figure it out. So I would encourage you to go out in the middle of the day, but you just have to pick and choose your battles and look for areas where the light is favorable, or maybe you can add some of your own light to fill in, like say a flash, something like that. Variable ND is great. It allows you to control how dark the filter is in front, and you can slow down those clouds or do some really fun things with that.
And then where you have a drastic lighting situation, instead of using a graduated ND, do you ever expose for two different photos for their lighting and then combine in Photoshop?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, HDR, high dynamic range photography, where you bracket a number of images when you have just an extreme, here's the great example of something like that. If you look in the Grand Canyon, there's no filter or any way that you can really control that patch of highlight and then all the shadows around it. There's not an even horizon or anything like that. So sure, you can shoot bracket images. And I would say if you're going to have to do this technique without a filter, then you're probably using at least 5 images. And I would say one's right on the money, and then +1, +2, -1, -2 on the exposure, so that you really are trying to give yourself a lot of range to work with, so that in post-production, you can combine those together to try to pull out those extreme scenarios. They do crop up, but more often than not, I generally am finding I can figure it out with a filter.
And then here's an easy one. Back to, I think, your second shot. Were you using a tripod in Croatia on that shot where you had all the people?
Yeah. Isn't that the kicker? You're hearing him saying, yeah, he's just walking around shooting all these 4-minute shots. Well, you guys, haven't you heard the 4-minute stance where you can just no, just kidding. Yeah, no way. You're totally right. I have a very small, lightweight tripod that I use that I can put in my backpack just for occasions like that, because we all know that if we get a big tripod, we never carry it around, or we only take it to the blue hour or the sunset shot. So I have many different kinds of tripods, and I love for Europe a very small, lightweight one, because one, I'll carry it during the day, and I know what's exciting about this filters, the NDs, are you start to imagine new photos that you would never even think of. And yes, you got to have that little tripod so you can stabilize the shot for a minute or longer, whatever that exposure is going to be.
Right. And then in your longer exposures with NDs, like the spires and the flower bush, could you also try painting it with a flashlight for a few seconds to lighten the flowers up a bit?
That's an excellent question. And the answer is a flashlight in the middle of the day isn't going to have enough power. Like you probably have seen lume cubes and things like that. When you work in lower, like shoulder hour, like more dusk and dawn, then that technique would work. In a situation where you're thinking of those spires in that bush, I don't think a flashlight would have enough power to do it. However, a real simple answer to that would be trying to add a flash to the shot. It's going to give you a different look for sure, but I love using speed lights in that capacity. It's a little more technical. It does give you a little different style to the shot, but that is another way to control contrast when the scene is small enough that you can illuminate it with your own light.
And then you were talking a little bit about some of the modes in the camera now that we can do. Gary said on the cloud photo of yours, instead of using an ND filter, Olympus might have a live comp mode that does something similar.
Yeah, Olympus has, if you guys have shot video, and I am not a video guy, I'll tell you right now, but we get video crews on shoots when we're shooting side by side on stuff. Some of these, and the reason I bring this up is some of these high-end video cameras have these built-in optical ND filters, and it's created in camera. It's not like a physical filter. It's almost more of like a pixel based thing. And I know the Olympus has something similar in it. I have never seen it used. I've heard about it and talked to an Olympus photographer about it, but I know they have something related to that where they have this ability in camera to do an ND style effect. But I can't tell you much more than that about it.
And then we had a question I'm going to take from a technical perspective. If you don't have a 5-stop ND, is it just as good to stack a 2-stop and a 3-stop? And I asked the Stingray team because they know their stuff. And they said it's technical, but we don't recommend stacking a 2-stop and a 3-stop. The filters are made of resin and will actually cause a magenta cast. The 5-stop is made of glass, and that's why there's no magenta. So there's
there
your
you go.
technical answer. So
wow,
it sounds like a no-brainer, but yeah, you're better off buying a 5-stop.
Wow, see, that's a good answer. All right.
And then someone wanted to know, why were all the fish dead in that shot?
Yeah, isn't that so back to, that's the end of the red salmon cycle. So they go out to sea as little fish fry. They come back years later. They come up these rivers. They lay their eggs. They spawn, and then they're gonna die right there. And so the end of these massive salmon runs in Alaska is rivers loaded with dead fish floating around. And you're thinking, well, aren't there enough bears to eat them? No, we're talking millions of red salmon, that are coming up these rivers, and they all spawn at the same time. And what's interesting on a bear behavior thing is initially when the bears eat salmon, they only go for the females that have eggs, have roe, and they can smell that. So you'll see them grab a fish, a perfectly huge, good looking fish, and then they throw it right back in the river because it's a male. And then they'll grab another fish that's smaller, but then they'll devour it, and they're going for the roe. Well, 2 weeks later, when all the fish are dying or dead, then they start eating dead fish. And if you go back in late September and into October, they're scrapping away at any little carcasses they can find. So it's this big cycle that continues out there. And that's why what was going on with that image.
What white balance do you use with the polarizer or ND filters?
Yeah, great question. I generally am in daylight. If I'm outdoors, I'm in daylight. I will go to cloudy, which adds a little warmer tone. My default, I would say, is daylight. If I see scenes that I want a little warmer, then I'll go over to a cloudy balance. But those are the two that I go back and forth from the most.
And on the shot with the golden blue filter, could you also go to Kelvin and put a bit more blue in with the polarizer?
Probably so. Sure, you could probably tweak it that way. There's a lot of ways to adjust color, at the camera level via filter or white balance or even a custom Kelvin setting. So yeah, I'm sure you could tweak it that way.
And how often do you recommend cleaning, servicing professionally your lenses?
That's the $1 million question. We, boy, I don't do it enough. I can tell you that. We're pretty rough on our gear, and honestly, Nikon, they're like, oh no, he broke another camera. A lot of the stuff that we do, we're like doing stuff that is really hard on the gear. So we send our stuff into Nikon generally once a year on camera bodies. Lenses, we'll probably hold on to them potentially for years without ever having to send them in, unless we somehow manage to break them. But that it becomes more of a sensor cleaning thing than anything else with digital cameras these days. But even that's getting better with some of the new technology and the sensor shields and things that are not allowing dust in there when you're doing a lens switch.
And can you share which lightweight tripod you travel with?
Yeah, so I'll tell you right now, there's a bunch of them out there. We are using a lot of Really Right Stuff tripods. They have a new tripod called the Ascend. And they also have other lightweight versions, but the Ascend 14 is a smaller tripod. I think it weighs a total of like 3 pounds, and yet it goes to 6 feet. I'm 6'1", so now you can get a tripod that only goes up to 4 feet and get something even more compact. And just know that you may have to set it up on a railing or on a table or something like that. We have done that, but if I want a tried and true tripod that's as lightweight as I can get and that I don't mind carrying around on the side of my pack all day, it's the Really Right Stuff Ascend 14. It has an integral head with it, and it's about 3 pounds.
And with all your travels and the increasing limits airlines are putting on carry-ons, how do you deal with this problem? I ask because I'll be on a trip to Africa, South Africa, Zambia, Botswana. The rule is you must use the tour company's duffel bag and you're allowed 1 carry-on, but the total of duffel and carry-on is limited to 44 pounds. Since we will be using a very small commuter planes for hopping around all these places.
Yeah, so we've done that trip. I mean, we were just over in Botswana and South Africa and Zambia and these different places. And yeah, they tell you you're going to get like the total combined weight is 44 pounds, and you're going to get 1 duffel and a photo backpack. And we just make do with that. What we do is, we use whatever photo backpack you're going to find, and then you have to be very discretionary on the lenses that you take. The thing that we do is, if we're on a trip that's on small planes and it's weight constricted in a big way, we use super lightweight duffels. So many people, we all want to have a roller suitcase when we go through to the airport, but a duffel weighs 2.5 pounds. The lightest roller bag that I can find is going to be at least 5, 6, 7 pounds. So you're already taking away 3 or 4 pounds of your weight. And then, you just are taking lighter clothing, and we rely on, laundry services when we're out. We're just saying, okay, obviously we're going to be doing laundry, whether it's travel clothing that we do in the sink, or if maybe there's a hotel or a lodge or something that's going to do our laundry for us. But and then you just have to be super, I hear you on the lenses. I mean, we may have 2 bodies and 3 lenses, and that's it. And our camera gear weighs 22 pounds in our photo backpack. And then the other 20 pounds is a few pairs of nylon pants, shirts, some underwear, and a ditty bag, and calling it good. It's possible. You just have to get a little creative. The scariest thing to that question is, you have your photo backpack, you're approaching this small airplane, and you're like, my gosh, they're going to take it and put it underneath the airplane. We've had that happen time and time again, and I wouldn't get too concerned about it, because generally they know you're on safari or you're flying into a bear lodge, and they're going to take care of your camera gear. They know that you're a photographer, and you can even just say, listen, this is all my camera gear, or I have my laptop in here, and it just goes against the grain tape. Give that to somebody. But we've never had a problem. I'm sure there's examples of it out there, but that you don't have a lot of choices because you can't carry a lot of gear with you.
Somebody said if they're not weighing passengers, wear the vest with many pockets.
Yeah. You got to be careful with that one. I mean, it's like, dude, did you put on like 20 pounds? I mean, you show up in like the airport in Botswana and you look like the Michelin Man. You're like, wow, it's 100 degrees outside. We've actually had people get called on that, where the guy's like, open your shirt. They have like a loose nylon coat.
You're going to be subject to extra searches at that point.
Oh no, it's like in this day and age. I mean, it's like you don't want to like act like you're the Unabomber or something. It's like no, it's just my camera gear. So we've tried that technique, and I'm like, all right, this is me. This is what I got. Take it or leave it. And sometimes you have to negotiate. We have lots of stories I can tell of people not letting us bring a lighting equipment on a shoot or something because of the weight or this or that. And you just got to be, all right, we're going to be flexible here and we're going to figure this out.
Another fun workaround from the audience, you can purchase a second seat in the small planes and take twice the gear and the weight of the second passenger.
Yeah. So. Yeah. A lot. What I would tell your company, like when we go to Africa and Botswana and Zimbabwe, we do buy extra seats in our planes just for that reason. And we can move our weight allocation from 42 pounds up to 55. And it's the best money you'll ever spend, because the stress of just getting everything into these small, lightweight setup, it's worth a few extra $100 to get a couple extra seats. And then everybody gets 12 more pounds that they can add onto their weight.
Yeah. Do you always send your camera body to Nikon versus a specialty shop for camera?
You know, I do. I mean, I live and breathe Nikon. I've worked with them for so long, and that's where we send our stuff. Not saying that the local camera folks couldn't be great. We don't have any store like that near us, so I don't have any other choices. And I just send it into Nikon and it comes back and everything's just looking like it's brand new out of the box. But I'm sure, and I know that in bigger metropolitan areas, there's great camera stores that may offer, you know, sensor cleaning or whatever, and that would probably work great.
And then if you didn't want to modify a camera to infrared, what would you do to simulate IR?
Well, you know, there is an IR filter, and we have one of those, and I did not put any images in from that. That's the simple way of doing it, because as you pointed out, you got to send the camera body in to have it actually adjusted just for IR. So you're dedicating a body just for that style of photography. The IR filter gives you a similar look, and I love the flexibility of the idea that you take it off, and yeah, you can still use the camera as a normal camera. I'll be honest, I don't shoot a lot of IR. My wife, Cree, does more than I do, and I love the look of it. It's just something that I have never really gone after. I'm always feeling like I got too many things shooting out of my head when I look into a scene, but that would be something that you might experiment with.
All right. And then someone said they've wrapped their lenses in magazines, burrito style, to protect them in check bags. So
yeah, you know, there are great tricks. And I mean, we travel with some folks that, you know, are packing like a 500 millimeter prime lens in their suitcase and shipping it that way. I mean, they just put it in there. Now, obviously that's not about the weight restrictions as much about how do you get all the big lens. Like we're headed to Nome, Alaska this weekend to photograph birds for a week up there, and we're bringing big, huge primes. But what we do is we have it all figured out, where we have, you know, your small piece is a lens you can put under the seat in front of you. You have your photo backpack. And then if we had extra lenses, we do this frequently. We'll put them into a suitcase, a padded one that has some stiffness to it. And you know what? They generally show up just fine. In fact, I can never think of a time where if we shoot some speed lights or a small lens, they always show up. Now I know I say that, and you'll have 3 people say, well, you know, it doesn't always work that way. And I hear you, but we've had good luck.
And can you use a graduated ND filter for sunsets?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. You got to get one in play. You will be like, wow, this is so cool. I mean, it's just like, you're going to shoot things differently. I think a lot of people, when we hear these questions about, you know, using a filter, I'm like, it's like it changes how you shoot a scene. And yes, with a sunset and a grad ND, think of an ocean scene. If you're on an ocean and that big orange orb is getting closer and closer to the horizon, I mean, it's bright and intense, and you may have beautiful reef rocks or something in front of you that already start to shade out. All you need to do is use that graduate ND, and this would be the hard stop transition, because you can line it up with the horizon. It's going to transform the shot in your camera just like that. It would be a great way to go.
What is your latest Nikon mirrorless camera that you're using, and why?
You know, we have Z9s. We love the Z9, and why? Because of the autofocus, among many other things that camera does. The biggest one is we photograph a lot of wildlife, and when you're trying to pan with a bird or a monkey in Costa Rica or whatever, just the animal eye detect and things like that are it's just almost unbelievable. But honestly, with the Z9, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's a flagship body, so it's a bigger pro level body with that built-in vertical grip, which we love. And you know, it's like, well, it's bigger and heavier. what that means is it is a little bigger and heavier, and it has a battery that you're not going to have to change for like 1 to 2 days, which is like unheard of in mirrorless. We just were down in Texas shooting thousands of bird photos every day, and my battery would drain down like 2 bars. I could go the next full day and shoot it. So there's so many things about that camera that we like. Its ability to shoot at night with starlight view, the frames per second. It has pre-release. I won't bore everybody to death with it, but we love it. It's an incredible camera. Now, do we shoot the Z6 and Z7 all the time? I mean, right now we have Z9s, and for our travel, when we're in Europe and places like that, we're bringing a Z6 or a Z7 too. And they work great. They're perfect. They're small, they're lightweight. We're not trying to track super fast moving action. And I just love the compactness of those cameras for that particular style of shooting.
This might be our last question for tonight. How did you get that mountain on the top left so red? Was that natural or creative?
Yeah, I would love to tell you that, oh my gosh, I put it in Photoshop. I went crazy with the saturation slider. And that's just totally not true. That is a mountain called Cerro Torre. It's in Patagonia, so the southern end of Argentina. And it has some of the most sublime light and clouds of anywhere that I've ever been in the world. It just is a wild, crazy place down there, and the light down there just has a quality to it that I don't know, maybe it's because it's so far south, or you can come up with any theory you want. On that particular shot, I was using, yet again, a graduated 2-stop filter, so I was trying to tone down the highlights a little bit, and it's just the light down there is what's amazing. And I can tell you, this goes back to an earlier point, the quality, and in particular, the color of light in Patagonia in the first 1.5 to 2 minutes of illumination. It's like watching somebody rotate a kaleidoscope. It starts blood red and pink like you see there. And then that is just stunning granite that you're looking at there, which is orange in the middle of the day. And so what happens with the light is it hits the rock, it looks pink, it doesn't even look real. And then very quickly, as the sun starts to come up, over the course of like 10 minutes, it'll go from pink to this classic strong orange, which is actually the color of the rock in combination with the sun getting higher off the horizon. It's just, you can see I'm not excited about it. I mean, I look at that photo and I want to get in a plane and fly right back down there. It's just such an amazing place.
All right. I think that's all of our questions for tonight, but thank you, Tom, so much for your presentation tonight. And like I said, you're a little bit different photographer than we normally have, and we got to take a look at some different shots, and I really appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it. And I hope folks had fun, and yeah, we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, everyone.